Hello guys and welcome to Raising Reef. I'm Rob Shaw and in today's video we're doing a July 2019 tank update. So a few things have changed in this tank since the last update. Get the sad news out of the way first. I did lose a fish. My sulphur goby, Mr. Grunt, passed away. I did make a video about that. If you want to check out what happened there, I'll put a link in the description or a little card up there and you can check that video out. In that video I pledged that I wasn't going to buy any more fish, and I maintain that is the case. I'm left with just my two clownfish. They're a mated pair, they lay eggs regularly. They can be a bit boisterous to other fish, so the plan is when I do come to move house and I relocate the tank, they are getting a little 60 litre nano tank, all of their very own, so they can breed and be quite happy in there without having to worry about the stress or the stress they may cause to any other tank inhabitants, which leaves my new tank, which is the same size as this, to be stocked from scratch with whatever fish we see fit to add to it. Other things I've been doing since the last tank update is I've been spending a lot of time going into the tank and cutting off some corals that are growing a little bit too close to each other. The original idea for this tank was it would be temporary and I could just somewhere to store my corals until we decided we moved house and set up a new tank, whatever. I started going through the process of getting all of the stuff together to build my new tank, and it is all ready to go. All we're waiting for is the sale of this house, moving to a new house, and I can set it all up and this stuff can be transferred over. But it's been 2.5 years this tank's been running and all of these corals have grown quite large. Some of them I've had to trim back to stop them from touching and fighting each other. Other corals recently I've been cutting up into smaller pieces, remounting them, and I've been moving on the rest of the corals to some of my tank maintenance clients. One such coral is my trumpet or candy cane coral, which is the neon green version down in the back corner. This was about 3 times the size that you see there. I've taken those two pieces, relocated them. That gives that a little bit more space to fill out. It's still quite a decent sized coral, but it has that little bit more room. It was touching the glass to the point where I couldn't actually clean that section and it was getting grubby. That sort of thing annoys me. I like to keep the glass nice and clean, so I always try to keep everything far enough away from the glass so I can clean it with ease without having to move stuff around or damage things as I pass it with the magnetic cleaner. I had a big plating Monty down on this lower shelf, and that has also been relocated because it was just growing too big for the area and it was starting to encroach on the corals around it. It wasn't looking particularly great on the edge at the front because it was being stung by the torch coral, and so I thought it's probably a good idea to move that on, create a bit of space there. So that's what I've done. That's been relocated. In the process I had to remount my purple stelo there, and this coral has seemed to really enjoy being remounted because it has suddenly started to create a lot of more new upward growth and novels around what were quite widespread branches on it, and it seems to be filling out really nicely, and I've noticed that in just the last 2 or 3 weeks, so I'm really pleased about that. I went through the entire tank with a stiff toothbrush and knocked back all of the purple clove polyps. If you've been following along for any period of time, you may have seen my video on removing purple clove polyps, and now I added a couple of tuxedo urchins which continue to have no interest in it whatsoever. That leaves me with the job of removing it every so often. I go in there with this toothbrush that I've cut the bristles nice and tight to the head, so it's quite stiff and it's a bit of a scrubber. I can get in there, scrub all the rock work over and knock most of that off. During that time it does make quite a mess of the tank. The water goes quite cloudy. It's a good idea once you've knocked all that back to then perform a water change, which is what I did. I cleaned it all off and I cleaned all the back glass and the sides of the weir, so it looks nice and clean and fresh now, but I did have to perform a 50 litre water change in order to get rid of as much of that cloudiness out of the water that was caused by those purple clove polyps being scrubbed away. Other things that have been going on with this tank, I've increased my lighting slightly. The reason for this was that I wanted to try and see if I could get a little bit more colour out of the SPS at the top in the middle of the tank. It has a sort of blue tinge to it, but it can get some really nice baby blue tips to it under intenser lighting. The problem I've got is, being a mixed reef tank, there are some other corals which don't appreciate really heavy lighting quite as much, and it's hard to get a balance between bleaching them out and providing enough light for that. The increased lighting has increased the amount of light hitting the sides of the glass, and this has resulted in more of a need to clean the glass more regularly. So it's been every other day, sometimes every day, I've been having to wipe the green film away from the front and back sides of the glass so that I can see through it properly, which is a little bit annoying because it's nice to be able to clean it a couple of times a week just to keep it looking fresh, and when you walk in it really pops and stands out in the corner of the room. This is starting to die down a little bit now. As the tank gets used to the extra lighting, things will adapt and the algae will be less likely to bloom on the glass. In the meantime, I have helped to try and reduce the phosphate that may be in the water by adding a little reactor back into the tank with some phosphate remover on it, and that is helping to just drive that phosphate level down to a level where the glass isn't getting quite so green quite so quickly. We don't like to do too much maintenance on this. This is an easy tank to look after. I don't usually have to do anything other than clean the glass halfway through the week and then perform a little bit of maintenance like top up the auto top off and clean the glass again at the weekend. Sometimes I do a water change. Sometimes I will feed a little bit of frozen food to the tank, but it does have an auto feeder at the back here that goes off 3 times a day to help keep the fish nice and healthy. Other news with this tank is I've added a new coral frag. This is an Acropora blue taut, and this particular coral I have some affection for from way back when I started in the hobby. It was one of the very first SPS corals I tried. I bought a tiny little frag which I added to my system, and I watched it grow into a massive, impressive, colourful coral. And it was one of the corals that really gave me confidence to carry on with the hobby and continue to add new corals to it. Up until then, it can be, when you first start adding corals and a few of them may die, it can put you off because you pay money for these corals, you add them to your tank. If they don't do very well, it's a bit like buying cut flowers. They look nice for a week or two and then you end up having to replace them. This hobby can be expensive enough without having to keep replacing your corals, and you feel a bit of a failure if you can't keep these things alive. So having great success with that coral gave me a lot of confidence to then buy more SPS corals, which I added to my old system, and they did really well also, and almost sort of off the back of that coral led to the success that I've had over the last 10 years. This coral has been in there for about 2 or 3 weeks now, and I can see just the slightest inclination that it may be forming some new coral growth at the top. I can't see any sign of new growth around the base as yet, but there is no recession, so I'm not panicked about that. I'm sure in time it will spread itself out. I've also added an anemone to the tank. Now this can be a risky business. Anemones are not like corals. They do have the ability to move around the tank to wherever they see fit. And adding them to an established tank can be problematic. I'm going to make a video on adding an anemone to a reef tank and talk about all of the pros and cons of doing so and what you can do to make it as safe as possible. But all we'll say is that I found a little space here after cleaning the plate in Monty off, and I thought, you know what would look lovely in there? A little row of little bubble tip anemone. I was inspired to pick one of those up because about 3 weeks ago I went out and bought some corals for one of my clients, and I went shopping in the shops and I bought him a couple of One rose bubble tip anemone, and one I believe is was it called a starfire anemone or something like that. It was more of an orangey and green colour. Very attractive looking anemones. Added them to his tank. One of them unfortunately sort of just melted away, which is a problem. Sometimes they don't ship very well, sometimes they can get damaged and they don't recover. The other one did okay, and I put it in and it was fine, but it has since moved itself behind the rockwork and you can't even see it. You just get a little bit of a glimpse of it if you crouch down and look from a certain angle. You can see it quite happily around the back of the rockwork where you can't appreciate it. This is another problem with anemones, but we will get into that in a future video. So I added the anemone to my tank. Obviously, as you can see, he's not where I put it, but it is now found itself positioned down in this back corner, which I'm not too unhappy about. This anemone is something I wanted to add to the tank with a view to then getting the clowns to host it when they get moved to their own little individual tank when they move. So at the moment I just wanted to get one established. Hopefully it will enjoy its time in the tank. Maybe it will split a couple of times and we can have a few anemones and give us a little bit of a chance of relocating those without any problem, maybe even passing some on to some other hobbyists. I've also added a Halloween hermit crab to this tank. Not for any particular reason other than to relocate him from where he was before. He was in one of my client's tanks. My client, I think, had removed him from the main display and popped him in the refugium because I think he feared that he may steal the conch shells and kill the conches to take their shells. So to keep him out of harm's way, he popped him in the refugium. They have different people there responsible for feeding the tank. Long story short, they were putting too much food in there for him and it was just sort of causing nutrient issues within the system. I've removed him from the little tank. The tank is now empty, doesn't need feeding. Hopefully we will resolve those nutrient issues and the overfeeding. That's the plan. We'll see how that goes. I've also added some calopa into that little tank to create a refugium. Hopefully that will help to suck up those extra nutrients and we'll get that tank back on track. The two Monty corals that I cut up in a previous video when I removed the plating Monty that was up high that was causing some problems, and the acropora that was stinging one of the Montys, they seem to be doing fine. They are recovering slowly. I can see polyps reforming on the places that were shadowed out and stung on this one with the little yellow polyps in the middle. And this other Monty is slowly starting to get a tinge of some colour back to it because it had bleached out due to the fact it was overshadowed by the Montipora completely and you couldn't even see it. Having exposed it all, I was worried that it might bleach out, especially increasing the light, but it is coping and it's starting to develop a little tinge of colour, so hopefully that will start to colour up nicely and it will look good again. The torch coral continues to look fabulous in the corner here. It is still stinging this other coral here, but that coral has pretty much been placed there to stop it from reaching its tentacles over and getting hold of the Duncan's coral. If you've been watching this channel for a long time, you may know that I had a problem with this lobo around the side stinging a Chalice coral that I had mounted on the rock on the side just next to it. If you remember, I broke that into two pieces, cut away the dead pieces and remounted those two. The one underneath, the smaller piece underneath the blasto here is doing really well. It's grown a lot of new flesh all the way around and it is starting to spread back towards the rockwork and over the milliput that I used to mount it. The other one further up is doing okay. It's not loving life up there. It may need to be relocated because I think that the light might be a little bit too intense for that coral. That coral doesn't need a lot of light at all. This one is almost in complete shade under here, but it seems to be just fine and really enjoying the amount of light flow and the food that is available to it. My Duncan's continues to grow and split heads, and I'm just really pleased about how well this Duncan's done. This was 4 heads, or 3 to 4 heads when I got it, and there are many heads here now and new heads popping out all the time. It seems to be doing really well. The Duncan's coral has to be one of my favourites. I like the way that its little whiskers move about and create some animation in the tank. I did remove one of the frog spawn corals that was growing around the side. It was quite close to the flow, One of the heads had been killed by this lobo, and the other two or three heads that were on there were quite close to quite intense flow. They never usually opened that much, so I decided to take them away. They got relocated to a customer's tank and they seem to be doing much better. I do still have this big sort of pom-pom of frog spawn coral here, and I have another one at the back, which is where the new anemone seems to have parked itself just next to it. During the time since the last update, I have been going through the tank and trimming off quite a lot of branches of coral that have been overhanging other corals or heading towards other corals. A little bit of, you know, topiary and shaping things and getting things how I want them. Some of the pieces of coral that come off were a bit too good to throw away, so I have taken a few pieces of dead live rock that I had down in the garage, and I've mounted a couple of pieces of the acro at the top in the middle to that. They are on the bottom at the moment because I didn't want them getting stung by the new edition of the anemone, which has since moved, and they will be getting popped back into this little space over here, and they can hopefully colour up and grow out there and create some nice little colonies to add to other tanks, sell on, swap, give away, whatever, however the mood takes me. There's something very rewarding about growing coral. I never get fed up with watching corals grow and then taking frags from those and watching those grow again. I could quite happily be a coral farmer. The lighting corals 24 hours a day experiment that I told you about in the last tank update, the corals seem to be doing okay. Still pretty much the same. It does seem to open up a little bit wider than it had been previously, but still no sign of any new growth. So it seems that lighting them in this refugium under 24-hour lighting isn't enough to kill them, but it certainly isn't growing them. Whether that's to do with the spectrum of the light or the intensity, or whether the duration of the light is causing the issue, it's hard to say. Obviously this is the same water that is in the main display, and all of the corals in there are growing at a reasonable rate. This coral has now been in here for the last 5 or 6 months. It's still a single head, although not in any way sucked in or receding or looking unhappy. It's just interesting little experiment to light them 24 hours to see what effect that has on them. So I will continue to update you on those if anything changes or not. The increase that I've done to this lighting has caused the lobo on this side to lose a little bit of colour. It will take a little bit of time for that to adapt to the extra light that's getting down to it. It's bleached out slightly, but it doesn't look like it's in bad health, and it is starting to regain its colour once again. That is one of the big problems with owning a mixed reef tank, is you have a lot of corals that like a lot of light and you have some corals that don't like a lot of light. You're trying to please everybody, and when you try and please everybody you can sometimes please nobody at all. So that concludes this July 2019 tank update. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like. Subscribe to this channel if you want to follow along with future updates and other videos that I put out. Take it easy guys, and I'll see you in the next one.